Welcome back to Authors and Innovators. I'm Larry Gennari, here with my partner in crime, as always, Doug Banks from the Boston Business Journal. If you're tuning in for the first time or for the first time in a long time, welcome back. This is our annual series, part of our annual series about where we talk to authors, innovators, and big thinkers. And today's author, Jeff Karp, is all of those things. Jeff Karp, welcome. Jeff is a biomedical engineering professor at Harvard Medical School and also teaches at MIT. Real underachiever, of course. Dr. Karp is an inventor, a researcher, and he focuses on innovative medical discoveries inspired by the natural world. And so it comes naturally, I'm sure, to him that he had to write his latest book, Lit, Life Ignition Tools. Use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. Jeff, welcome. Really, really excited both to read the book, but to have you tell us a bit more about Lit. So why don't we start that way? What's Lit?
Well, thank you first so much for having me here today, and for this great opportunity to talk about Lit. To me, Lit is really all about how we can intercept routine patterns in our lives to actively think and decide versus just jump in with habitual responses. I think, so much of our lives are made up of patterns and habits, and often, I feel like we get into this low energy mode, this energy saver mode, this autopilot mode, and it can really serve us well in certain regards. But in other regards, it can, we can just lead to like repeating old patterns that just don't serve us. And I think, it's really important for us to consider a couple things that we're up against at this snapshot in time, this snapshot in human evolution. One of those things is that for thousands and thousands of years, we were hunters and gatherers. We were, working hard outside all day and really wired so that our brains and bodies gravitated to this low energy state to conserve our energy when we needed it. It was for survival purposes. But then couple that with kind of where we are today, where we still have that wiring. We gravitate to this low energy brain state. I think a lot of people can connect to it. Like, for example, maybe you drive from point A to point B and you forget the route you took,
right.
Or, you can't find your keys and you later find them in your pocket, or you walk into a room and you forget why you walked into that room. There's so many things in our life. Maybe you ate a meal and you're shocked that it's over. You can't remember a single flavor. So I think our brains, our bodies sort of gravitate to this low energy state. And then I think, that coupled with where we are today, there's $900 billion that is spent every year on marketing and advertising to hijack our attention.
Right.
Algorithms to kind of, serve us what we ought to believe is important. And I think that when you couple these two things together, it really can lead us down paths that just don't serve us very well. When our brains are sort of in this low energy state, we're open to messaging that that just might lead us down a path that's not useful. It might, take the food industry, for example, right? I mean, or take, look at all the snack foods and all these things are made to be like, they're terrible for us, but the advertising can really capture our attention and really hijack our brains, making us think that we need it and that it's important for us to have it. And unless we have tools and strategies to get our brains into this high energy state, we are susceptible to this messaging, and it's a massive, powerful force that we're up against. And to me, Lit is really just multiple on-ramps to help us be more intentional and deliberate in our lives.
Yeah. I love that. So it's really about intentionality in a lot of ways. So what do you think, Jeff, what do you think prompted you to write this? I mean, some of the best books are written as a result of memoir, personal storytelling, and you have a bit of your own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what happened was about 7 or 8 years ago, an agent from New York reached out to me, Heather Jackson, and she had read a few articles that had been written on some of the bio-inspired work we do in my laboratory, where we look to nature for new ideas to solve medical problems. And I was interested to write something about it, but there was this other burning desire within me to write about something completely different. And that was when I was in the second grade, and pretty much all through elementary school, I suffered from, or struggled with, I should say, undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. And in particular, in the second grade, I'd sit at the back of the class. I would feel kind of demoralized. Nothing was.
You were that kid. You were that
I was
kid.
that kid that felt like an alien, that felt completely like wasn't connecting with anyone socially, wasn't being able to keep up with anything. Every concept seemed foreign. Nothing was working. My mom tried flashcards and cue cards and phonics and all kinds. Nothing worked. And so at the end of the second year, the teacher wanted to hold me back to repeat the second grade. And my parents negotiated that if I spent the summer with tutors catching up, that I could go on to the third grade. So here I am in summer school. And, I go in every day and they'd ask questions. And on this particular day, one day I remember like it was yesterday, I went in, the tutor read a passage, asked me some questions. I gave answers as I usually did. But then the tutor did something different. They looked at me in the eye and said, after I gave an answer, they said, "How did you think about that?"
Great question, right? Great
That
question.
changed my life. That question changed my life. And I feel it's a question that that we should be asking ourselves and others, because it was the first time I had this almost crystal clear awareness of, being able to think about thinking. It was this sort of like, wait a moment, this aha state where all of a sudden I started being able to sort of tune into things I hadn't tuned into before. I'll give you an example. I started to realize that while the teacher was, teaching in class and, very difficult for me to pay attention and minimal was sticking, anytime I asked a question, I was able to hyper focus for a few moments afterwards on the answer, and the answer would imprint in my mind. I could connect it to other things that I knew, and it would actually stay there in my memory, and I could recall it later. So I started to realize that questioning is a main mode for how I learn. And it's become like a predominant, I feel like questions is like the best technology that we have as human beings. It just can unlock so much in our professional and our personal lives, and we can get better and better at asking high value questions. And that's really where my journey began.
Jeff, one of the things that I loved that I really enjoyed about the book is that you take you talk about neurodiversity and you talk about the brain, but you really sort of blend the two. One of the areas that I'm curious about is the macro version of neurodiversity. So how diverse experiences stimulate all brains. And so your recommendations around, telling readers, put yourselves in stimulating diverse places in order and talk about how that stimulates brains and what you hope readers will take away from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first of all, I spoke a little bit about just a moment ago what we're up against. I think the other thing that we need to consider the other part or other half of our evolutionary inheritance is that we all have this incredible prefrontal cortex, this front part of our brain that when you take the ratio of the kind of volume of that or mass to the entire brain size, it's like, we have the largest of any animal in the animal kingdom. And that's where we do our thinking about thinking. That's where we do our planning, our problem solving. That's where our emotional regulation comes in. It's just so powerful, and we all have it. And then we also, couple that with our neuroplasticity, our ability to reprogram our brains or program them in various ways based on how we think and how we act and how we practice, whatever it is that we're trying to learn. And I think that there's on top of that, there's this incredible spectrum that we have, in terms of people's genetics, in terms of people's experiences and how they think and how that wiring is all kind of connected. And so I feel like we live very boring lives if everyone was the same, if we, were all, had a thought the same way and acted the same way. And so that I feel like neurodiversity is just so, and in my laboratory we really I like, it's almost like a tool that we use to thrive. We've had people from 30 different countries. People have different education systems in there, and they think differently. And we also have had, we actually minimize the overlap of expertise of people in the lab. So we've had like immunologists and basic biologists and all kinds of engineers and a gastrointestinal surgeon, a cardiac surgeon. We've had a dentist in the lab, constantly changing. And that just provides us with, this whole mishmash of people who think differently and have different access to different tools and different knowledge. It just extends our reach in these vast ways that allow us to approach all kinds of different problems. And so for me, it's like the diversity of the team really is just, it's such a force within, for what we do.
And Jeff, that's such a wonderful intro to the book. You've interviewed some 40 people and asked them, how do you think differently? How do you press pause and pinch your brain and reset? Was there a common thread across those people? I don't want to give away the book, other than to say there is no common thread across all of these folks.
No, I think the common thread across everybody is really this intentionality, this tapping into the prefrontal cortex and our neuroplasticity, and this idea that we all have this capability. Like, we all have the ability, like, we're using the machinery we have is so powerful, but we're only using a tiny fraction.
Right. We got to make space. We got to make space for it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about some of the things that, because each chapter seems to give a new and interesting tip, new and interesting insight. What are the things, if you had to say to someone, you need to pick up this book to do this?
Sure. So a lot of things jump to mind. One in particular, so one of the tools is press pause. And I think that we kind of underappreciate how powerful pressing pause can be in our lives. I'll give you an example. So there was a period of my time where I would just book back-to-back meetings all the time. And
sort of like Doug. Doug does that still.
Yes. And what I found was that, I get to the end of the day, I would feel productive, but if I sort of stepped back and sort of assessed, sort of decisions I was making, there was always something kind of left, something like there was some way to maximize the impact a bit more or to create more value. And so what I started experimenting with was, okay, what if I just take 10 minutes in between my meetings, it can be 5 or 15. And I literally either just do nothing, just sit there with my eyes closed, or just, focus on breathing, or go for a walk, outside, inside, doesn't matter, but just to let my mind sort of catch up. And what I realized is that I started to make these connections that I wasn't making when I didn't build this time in. So I started to, I'd have a conversation with somebody, and then I'd take a break, and all of a sudden it would come to me and be like, wait a moment, I met someone a year ago and they said something similar. Maybe I should connect these people together. Or maybe we can all work, it was like all these connections started to happen. And so I think our brains really need time to process information and experiences in order for us to really connect all the dots and maximize the value and the impact and the opportunity, the learnings, that we're sort of encountering in, every day. And so to me, that's one of the tools. And so there's a number of stories, kind of detailing how press pause it can be used and how it's been so transformational, both in my life and many others' lives.
Yeah.
On the topic of connections, Jeff, one of the tools that really stuck with me was the chapter called, Hug Nature. So even this morning I was out and I just took a walk in the woods this morning, listening to some of the migratory songbirds, and I just loved what you wrote about the connection between nature and humans. Talk a little bit about that and why it's so important for us to connect with nature more than we do, especially those of us like Larry and I are sitting in our offices all day.
No, nature has really played a major role in my life, and I think there's so many things to say about it. I mean, for one, I think one thing that you're kind of alluding to is, I mean, the science is catching up as well, showing us that when we go out into nature, even for short periods of time, we switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system. Our blood pressure goes down, our heart rate goes down, our breathing rate goes down. We start to have a general sense of wellness. And multiple studies have demonstrated this. There's all kinds of factors that are released in a forest, for example, from trees and plants that we inhale and can actually impact our biology in very positive ways. But the science has also showed that just sitting on your laptop and looking at images of nature can have a similar effect, not to the same extent, but it can actually help to reduce it can improve your sense of calmness and wellness and reduce your heart rate and things like that as well. And I think in addition to that, there's so many nuances in nature that can captivate us. And really, if I step back and sort of look at, civilization and kind of humans where we're at, I think one of the big challenges for us is that as great as the education system has been, not only have we been educated out of being curious, what I think Ken Robinson, one of the most watched TED Talks of all time, he spoke about that. But also, we've almost been educated out of asking questions. We've been educated out of, it's just like our current culture flattens our curiosity, our creativity. And when we go into nature, sometimes I've gone into nature in the past and haven't really felt anything, or I kind of get a little bored sometimes. But to me, that just shows me how far I've attuned from the rhythms of life and how much I actually need to be going back to nature. And I think, I'll just give you an example. Recently I bought this microscope. I don't know if I think it's downstairs actually, but I bought this handheld microscope that has a screen on it, little tube, and I take it around my neighborhood and I just put it down like on a rock or a leaf or a blade of grass. I zoom in, kind of change the light. And it's like these fractals of curiosity just emerge, like the layers upon layers at which you can look at things. And so to me, engaging with nature is a way to really get us back to where we were as children, just limitlessly curious about everything. And I think that, the algorithms, the education system has kind of flattened our curiosity. So I think that in addition to just the wellness and feeling more calm, we can interact with nature to really cultivate that curiosity and gain it back in a really significant way.
And you describe yourself on the cover as a bio-inspirationalist, entrepreneur, and futurist. I love that, Jeff. You also cite a lot of sources and writers and thinkers. Jeff, what are you reading these days?
So I've been really getting into books that are focused on indigenous ways of being. So I don't know if you can see this here, but like the kinship worldview. Can you see that?
Wow, restoring the okay.
There we go.
Restoring the kinship worldview. How are you enjoying this? That's really neat.
I love it. I love it because to me, I just feel like there's so many different ways of living. And we tend to, I think as humans, we tend to draw these sort of like solid lines around things in boxes, compartmentalize. But when we really step back, and this is the beauty, I think, of just interacting with other people, especially people who are diverse, think differently, are from different places, we gain these different perspectives. We gain these different frames of reference. And it can help us to then we can think about it and reflect on it and sort of think like, oh, maybe there's another way to think about this or another way to act or another way to just be. And to me, I've just really enjoyed reading and sort of getting into these indigenous ways of being and this kinship worldview, because I think that the current worldview is almost us against nature. And, it may not feel that way if we just sort of, if we don't think deeply about it. But as I've thought more and more deeply about it, it kind of like, when you look at just what's happening to the planet, the destruction, the oceans. I'll just give you an example. Like in the oceans, there are these sub-millimeter creatures, phytoplankton, which are providing over half of the oxygen that we breathe.
Right. Right.
And, the world is so interconnected. If we continue to pollute the oceans, we're going to suffer. Like everything is connected. And the other thing about the kinship worldview I just find really fascinating is that, these sort of focal points of power just are frowned upon in indigenous ways of being, from what I've read. And it like this idea that there's just more collective decision making and there's never one person who ends up having all the power. It never works out well that way. And so, but when you look at society, we have all these sort of concentrations of power. And so I've just really enjoyed sort of just reading about these different ways of being and just been very inspired by it and sort of learning and thinking about how I might be able to change my life so that, I can just feel better about things, because I think that we're at this point in time where a lot of people are just kind of feeling like there's something not right. There's something missing.
Unsettled. Right. Wow. Very interesting. Doug, how about you these days? Where you are always reading this? I know you finished Lit. Now you're on to something else.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
I just picked up a book called 15 Cents on the Dollar by Louise Story and Ebony Reed, a former coworker of mine. It's a story of Black American wealth. It's told through history, through different stories of specific companies and people, and it's sort of a historical look at the racial wealth gap in our country. And just started it, but looking forward to that. It's been great so far. How about you, Larry?
We're going to have to talk to those authors. I'm taking a page out of Jeff's book. I just finished a book called Total Garbage by David Humes. He's the one who wrote Garbology. And he talks about little things that we can do each and every day to make the planet a better place. He starts the book in a very engaging way and talks about how each of us eats 285 pieces of microplastic a day. And we do that through the water we're drinking, through the bottles, through air, through our packaging, through taking leftovers out and heating them up in Tupperware, that kind of thing. And he says it's the equivalent of taking a credit card, shredding it in tiny pieces and ingesting it. So it's an image that you take throughout the book, and it's quite fascinating. Jeff Karp, thank you so much. The book is Lit. Life Ignition Tools. Use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. Doug and I thank you so much for being with us, Jeff. So I want to tell our folks who are watching, buy the book.
Thank you.